From the library of the New York Stock Exchange, at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution for global growth for more than 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now, at the NYSE and at ICE's 12 exchanges and 7 clearinghouses around the world. Now here's your host, Josh King, Head of Communications at Intercontinental Exchange.
We've talked about this a few times before in the Ice House, that magical platform connecting buyers and sellers, cutting out intermediaries, increasing efficiency, and saving costs. It's really the origin story of Intercontinental Exchange, making the energy market transparent so that a screen could let traders see all of the bids and offers and in an instant discover price. I had a similar experience last night. It's one many of us have. John F. Kennedy Airport, a long flight from London. I just want to get home. There's that taxi line over there. I know what that experience will be like. Hot, no air conditioning, have to stay focused on giving the driver directions to the West Village. The alternative? My finger. The app, Uber. It knows my address and I know the driver, his car, license plate number, and his rating, and air conditioning. If I want a luxury car, that's at my finger as well. The car shows up in a matter of minutes. I shut the door, the driver knows where he's going, and I put on my noise-canceling headphones to keep plowing through early seasons of The Americans, unfettered, as the car moves through Queens. There's a level of rebellion in that efficient decision. I'm no longer beholden to the rate-setting decisions of government or the condition of the cars. I'm participating in a sort of political statement. For all of the influence of taxi medallion owners and their sway over city government, I'm endorsing Travis's Law, a reference to Uber's founder and former CEO Travis Kalanick, who declared that Uber is better off entering the market with or without permission, demonstrating the product to the public, and building a customer base. Tech startups, by their nature, are disruptors, and innovation doesn't ask permission. This dynamic has put companies like Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, FanDuel, plus thousands of entrepreneurs trying to turn their idea into the next tech unicorn directly in the crosshairs of government, regulation, and the established traditional companies operating in that space. The elegant platform connecting buyers and sellers. Our guest today, Bradley Tusk, recognized there was a gap in the market to help these tech upstarts apply their own form of Travis's Law, and has brought to bear his unique skill set honed from a career in politics. He's the founder of Tusk Holdings and the author of the newly released book, The Fixer, My Adventures in Saving Startups from Death by Politics. My conversation with Bradley Tusk, right after this.
Dick's Sporting Goods believes sports matter and that every kid deserves the chance to play. Since 2014, through their Sports Matter program, they have already helped over 1 million young athletes in all 50 states. As they continue in their mission to save youth sports, they invite you to join by visiting sportsmatter.org and donating today. More on Dick's Sporting Goods efforts later in the show.
Our guest today, Bradley Tusk, has lived a political journey going back to 1992, a chance meeting at a place we both were, the Democratic National Convention at Madison Square Garden. From there, I headed out on a bus tour with Governor Bill Clinton. Bradley met an even more important mentor, Philadelphia Mayor Ed Rendell. We'll track his political journey and then focus on his work with tech startups at Tusk Strategies, which he started in 2011, growing it to one of the leading strategy firms today, which includes Tusk Montgomery Philanthropies, which itself is focused on what may be the holy grail of curing America of its own political ills, easy mobile voting, electing a mayor, senator, or president with the same ease as I hailed a car from Uber last night. A fantasy based on our entrenched political system, or maybe just 10 to 20 years out. As President Trump would say, we'll see what happens. Bradley's got the money and he's got the time. Welcome to the Ice House, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's start with your bona fides, because The Fixer, your new book, it's an amazing story. Your dad came to the U.S. straight from the refugee camps after World War II, a schmata salesman.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, my grandparents and my father, lived in the refugee camps after World War II. I think wanted to go to either Israel or the U.S. Finally had a cousin on my grandmother's side in Brooklyn who was able to sponsor them. They come over. My grandfather kind of right away goes into the schmata business, does okay with it. And then I grew up in that very traditional kind of first generation American, you have to accomplish everything thing, which was good on one hand and stressful on the other, and still is.
I mean, Bradley, it's the early 90s, and you paint a picture of being like the Matt Dillon character in Flamingo Kid. His name was Jeffrey Willis, fetching the drinks for patrons at the Flamingo Club. You're out on Long Island.
I'm at the Sands Beach Club. It's effectively the same thing. I think I say in the book, except without the MILFs and the high-stakes gin games. But otherwise, it's the same thing. You're just hustling constantly to get people to give you bigger tips for getting them coffee and refilling their kids' pools with water and stuff like that.
So what drew you into the city in '92? This guy with the Irish name, Brendan O'Dwyer.
I got really lucky. So I'd always loved politics, but one downside of being a first-generation American is we didn't know anybody, right? But my dad had one friend, a guy named Brian O'Dwyer, who was a lawyer for the Carpenters Union. And Brian knew I liked politics and called me one day and said, hey, I can get you a one-day Carpenter's pass to the convention. Do you want to go? I said, yeah, sure, that'd be great. So I did, what seemed logical at the time, which I looked in the newspaper and said, when's the convention? And it says noon to midnight. Now, because you've been to a whole bunch of these things, around 8 p.m. is when things get going, maybe even a little after that. I didn't know that, so I showed up at the garden at noon, and I'm walking around, and there's nobody there, and there's two guys running for state rep in Montana speaking, and kind of jokes on me. But I look up in the audience, and Ed Rendell, who at the time was the mayor of Philadelphia, was just sitting there by himself. And I had just finished my freshman year at Penn, so I kind of, had some sense of who he was. I said, maybe I can say hi to him. We'll see what happens. And I was a little nervous, but, if anyone who knows Rendell, and you probably do, he was probably just talking to the empty chair, right? He was more than...
He wanted company.
Yeah, more than happy to have someone come over. So I go over there. We have a nice conversation. And about 10, 15 minutes in, I feel like, okay, I've used my allotted time here. I thanked him. And he said, do you want an internship when you get back? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. So he said, send me a letter. We'll set it up. I go home. I write a letter. And what I didn't know then, but I know now, is that correspondence is just the black hole of government, right? Everything goes in. Nothing comes out. So every day I'm going home, opening the mailbox. There's no letter from Rendell. So I get back to school, and for some reason, it just gets in my head. I'm like, oh, I'll go see him. So I go to City Hall. This is a decade before 9/11, so security is not anywhere near what it is today. And I get to not his specific assistant, but the outer office. And I said, is the mayor here? And in retrospect, it's a totally crazy question to ask. And the people who do ask that question are either one of two things. Either they are crazy or they're protesting something, right? And I wasn't crazy. I didn't have any petitions. I was just this gullible, nice kid, right, who was so clueless, didn't realize you couldn't ask to see the mayor. And these nice old ladies from South Philly were manning the desk, and they said, he's not here, but you can leave him a note. Okay. So I write a note. I get back on the set to go back to the dorms at Penn. And I'm like, you idiot, you can't just go, this is over. There's no way they're going to want you after this. And I kind of wrote it off in my head. Get back into the dorm, phone rings, please hold for the mayor. He said, when are you coming to work? And I said, I'll be right there, and worked for him all through college.
And as I track, call it the next 15 or 20 years of your life, you are working for a gallery of politicians who sometimes had fame and sometimes had infamy, and
Yes.
and sometimes a mix of the two. And if you look in retrospect of the world that you travel in now, advising the hottest tech startups in the world, these were guys who were sort of incredibly charismatic, but also craving attention. Henry Stern at the Parks Department, Chuck Schumer just elected to the Senate, doing what I've learned from my friends like Jeff Berman, the Sunday news conference,
Yep.
advocating for something like a panel to study tooth decay. Bring me briefly through those early moments with Stern, through Schumer, and then out to Chicago and back.
Yeah. So my first job in New York politics was at the New York City Parks Department. And I got really lucky that the summer of, going into my senior year of college, I was in a program called the Government Scholar. So the city had a program where they would bring in people from different schools and kind of introduce them to how city government works and pay you to work there for 8 weeks, whatever it was. And I had actually created a program like that for Rendell and for Philadelphia. So I knew about it. I applied. They took me. And because I knew city government a little better than the other kids in the program did, they all wanted to go solve homelessness, and they were very noble about it. And I just kind of knew, it's really just the agency where they're going to give you real work to do. And Henry Stern is kind of fading from lore now, but it's just this New York political legend, brilliant guy, somewhere in that straddling that line between genius and crazy, but usually in a good way. And he actually came to the meeting when I went there and he said, if you come here, I'll give you real work to do, because it was free for the agencies. And so I said, okay, that's what I need to hear. So it worked for him that summer. They went back after college. We spent about 2 years as his press secretary, did every crazy stunt you could possibly imagine, from, walking, him wearing a toga and walking across the sheep meadow with a flock of sheep, to burying him in a casino park and putting him in a groundhog suit and having his head
He'd do
pop
anything
up.
you told him to do.
Anything. If we thought it would get press, he would do it. Now, on one hand, it's because, like every politician, he really, really wanted attention. But he also understood that for the park system to get the kind of resources it needed, he had to kind of take advantage of his wackiness and get attention for it, because it doesn't get the kind of funding that the police department gets or the schools get, nor should it. But he was still trying to get as much as he possibly could, and he understood that by getting attention, he could really help the agency, and he was just a genius at that. And so worked for him for a couple of years, went to law school, like every good Jewish boy does, and then did what every good Jewish boy is not supposed to do, and said, no, I'm not going to go work at a law firm, and pissed off my parents. I went back to the Parks Department instead, ran a chunk of the agency for Henry, and then Chuck Schumer was looking for communications director, and I didn't want to work in Washington, I didn't want to work in the legislature, and I didn't want to do PR, so of course I ended up in the job because I didn't want it. Spent a couple years working for Chuck. There's that joke, obviously, the most dangerous place in Washington between Chuck Schumer and a TV camera. It's true. He's definitely the most media hungry and savvy politician in America now, I guess, other than Trump, right?
You tell this amazing story of trying to smooth over the effort by the New York Times Magazine to profile the relationship between Senator Schumer, the junior senator from New York, Hillary Clinton, and this scene in which the obligatory photographer is assigned by the Times just to take a nice portrait of Schumer. The guy wears his reading glasses at the tip of his nose. He's not a photographer, but he's telling the photographer how to do his job.
Yeah, and that was Chuck. Now, on one hand, right, and thank God that photographer was nice enough to sort of still make Chuck look good in the picture, because he probably could have chose to have done otherwise. Hillary, of course, being a lot more sophisticated, knew just to let the photographer do his job, and they'd deal with it on the back end. Look, that made working for Chuck both great and maddening. Maddening because he would just call you all day, every day, with the slightest thought, and micromanage you and drive you absolutely crazy. I remember once, this was like right before, I think I even had cell phone, I would go to the gym at 5 a.m. to try to escape him. And then one time, like, over to the gym, they said, "Is the loudspeaker, is there a Bradley Tusk here?" And I'm like, yeah. They said, "Senator Schumer's on the phone." Like, how did he find out what gym?
Doesn't sound happy.
No, I think we were not, didn't make the Daily News on the first 10 pages or whatever it was he'd wanted for that day. But I learned a ton, right? Because for all of the same frustrations of kind of having everything dictated to me by Chuck day in, day out, he's a really brilliant guy. He works incredibly hard. He's very savvy. He's very experienced. And so, in those 2 years, I probably learned more about how to deal with the media than you could have learned in 10 years at a PR firm or something like that. And
then you got this call from John Wyma.
Yeah. So the in between is Mike becomes mayor.
That's Michael Bloomberg.
Yep. Sorry, Michael Bloomberg. I go to City Hall, start working for Mike, and I'm very happy doing it because he's great to work for, right? And I felt
totally
like
different than Schumer. I mean, a person who just has enough money to, not care what the press thinks too much, and he's not great in camera, but he's also running City Hall like he ran Bloomberg LP. Yeah. Right out in the bullpen like we are.
Yep, I sat in the bullpen with him. So I'm sitting in the bullpen one day, early 2003, and my phone rings. This guy named John Wyma, who had been Chuck's chief of staff when I was there, and John said, "Do you want to be deputy governor of Illinois?" And I said, "What's a deputy governor, and why are you calling me?"
And where's Illinois for a kid from Long Island?
I had gone to law school in Chicago, so I at least knew that part. But he said, "It's the guy that runs the state." And that turned out to be true. So, there's both a benign reason and a less benign reason for why I got hired. So the governor obviously was Rod Blagojevich. The benign reason was Rod was crazy, right? So, put aside any illegal stuff. If he had just pled insanity at his trial, they would have had to have given it to him. So dealing with him on a day-to-day basis was unbelievably hard, regardless of anything else, just because you're dealing with this lunatic all day, every day. So they needed someone who, I was 29, right? So basically it was a career-making job, and I was going to put up with a lot more shit than most people would. So that was part of it. Part of it was Rod, turns out, saw his job as solely running for office. So he
didn't want to work very hard, did he?
He really would say, "I did my job, and I'll do it again in 4 years." He would not go, we'd go 3 months at a clip without him even showing up at the office, right? So I knew a little bit about a lot of things. I knew about policy, press, politics. I was a lawyer. And so I could kind of manage everything in a way. So that was the benign. The less benign, of course, is I was young, I was naive. And the only things I didn't oversee in the state were contracts, grants, and patronage. Of course, if you want to rob the place blind, those would be the places you would do it. But I was young and naive enough to not really, until he asked me to extort Rahm Emanuel, I actually didn't see anything illegal.
You could have avoided that whole FBI conversation as your kid was being born.
Yeah. So the story's a pretty good story here. So, and by the way, please, whoever's listening, please consider buying the book, even though I'm telling you the story's in it anyway. So Rahm was a congressman at the time from Chicago, and Rod had promised $2 million for an athletic facility in Rahm's district. Pretty standard fare. And I actually didn't deal with grants, as we just discussed, so I wasn't aware of it. And then one day Rahm calls me in typical Rahm, f you this, f you that, threatening, all the usual Rahm stuff. So, okay, let me look into it. That night I'm on the phone with Rod, and I say, hey, by the way, Rahm called me, he's upset, wants this money. And I figured Rod would say, I don't know anything about her, yeah, just make it happen. And instead he said, not till I get my fundraiser. I said, what are you talking about? He said, Ari Emanuel, who's Rahm's brother and is a Hollywood mogul, had promised a fundraiser for me. And if I give him the grant before I get the fundraiser will never happen. So tell them they need to do the fundraiser first. And I said, you can't really...
Got to keep that leverage over Rahm.
Right, exactly. But you can't, it's not exactly legal or kosher to say, I'm not going to give you public money for a school until you have a private fundraiser for me. And so luckily, I was able to say no to it, report it to a few different people, put a stop to it. Grant was given, fundraiser never happened. But because I still had that conversation with him, when Rod was arrested, one of the 24 counts he was charged with was attempted extortion of Congressman Emanuel, and I had to testify in both corruption trials about what happened. And before the first trial, the FBI wanted to talk to me. My wife at the time was like 38 weeks pregnant, and I was running the Bloomberg campaign. I said, look, I just can't get to Chicago for a little while. And they said, we'll come to you. Okay. So it's a Saturday, and they bring out 25 people, FBI agents, U.S. attorneys, all these different people. And as I'm getting dressed to go to the meeting, my wife's water breaks. I said, oh, God. So we called the doctor, and I didn't explain I was going to meet with FBI. We just said, like, hey, should we go to the hospital right now? And they said, and it was our second kid, so we knew a little more about this. And she said, no, it's too early. Don't worry about it. Do what you got to do. So I go to this meeting. And about an hour and a half, and my wife calls me and says, we got to go to the hospital. And she said, I got to go. They said, what do you mean? We just brought in like all these people to talk to you. I said, it's my kid being born. What do you want me to do? And so I left, and we sent them photos that night so that they knew that it was real. And I went back to Chicago about a month later and met with them.
And eventually you get back to New York, a little diversion at Lehman Brothers in an inopportune time, but almost back to the safety and security of Bloomberg City Hall, but trying to do something that's never been done before or not in a long time, which is win a third term as mayor. And you got this pesky guy as an opponent, Anthony Weiner.
Yeah, it's funny, in a weird way, I'm going to take credit for us kind of saving New York from debacle inadvertently. So I really was worried that Anthony would have beaten us. And here's the reason why. New York City is a Democratic town through and through, right? The reason we had a string of Republican mayors was crime was so bad in the early 90s that Rudy had an opening and just barely beat Dinkins in 93, despite Dinkins having a horrific first term. And then 9/11 propelled Mike to City Hall. Absent those two things, neither of them are even close to winning. So it's always Democrats. So if you or I were the Democratic nominee for mayor, we'd walk in with 45% of the vote. Absolutely anybody would. So that means you've got to win 50.1% of the remaining 55, which is like 90% of the remaining vote. And my concern was that Weiner would get the same Democratic votes that everyone would get, but he's a really smart guy. He's really aggressive, and he would cut into our base, which were basically Jews and white ethnic Catholics and people like that. So I didn't want him to run. Obviously, I had no idea about all the stuff he ended up getting in trouble for, but put together a really aggressive campaign to knock him out of the race. And I think the final straw was probably the hockey game where Anthony played hockey every Tuesday night at Chelsea Piers and was very proud of himself because he felt like he was a tough guy playing hockey. But a lot of people in our campaign, like Howard Wolfson and me, had worked in Congress. So we understood how the vote schedule worked, and it's unpredictable, right? So we kind of knew, like...
But if you got rink time at Chelsea Piers, you got to make it to rink time.
So that we understood that was his mentality, but we also knew eventually there'd be some vote, even if it's a minor procedural thing, at some point, a vote would be called on the House floor and he'd be playing hockey. So every Tuesday night, we snuck a photographer into Chelsea Piers and kind of waiting for that to happen. And then one night, finally, it's exactly what happens. They call a vote. Our guy gets a great shot. He literally has Wiener on the back of his jersey, so it's not even like, it couldn't have been worse for him. And the front page of the Post the next day is puck off, with the picture of him in goal. And that was pretty much the final straw. So we tortured him as much as we could. I had people door knocking his parents. I mean, everything you can imagine. And it's funny, I was kind of seen a little bit as the bad guy at the time because you're being too rough on this guy. This isn't now. In retrospect, I think if we didn't do that, he would have run. If he had run, he might have won. And all of those crazy Twitter scandals that were, fun to read in the tabloids, but in reality, he was a backbencher in Congress. It didn't really matter. Would have happened at City Hall where it would have mattered a lot. So thank God we did, even though we weren't doing it for that reason.
So Mike Bloomberg is a businessman. You're running his third campaign. He's spending what it takes with people like Doug Schoen and Bill Knapp and Howard Wolfson and fielding a team of all-stars to make sure that he's going to win. And I'm aware of this, and you write about it honestly in the book, that you guys each got a bonus for the victory. And
yeah.
You talk about, after taxes, $234,000 left over. That's what you got to yourself, Bradley. And you decide, after all these years working for politicians, learning a lot, but also having a lot of scar tissue from it, you're going to go out on your own.
Yeah. So originally I was going to do it with some mutual friends of ours. So Howard Wolfson and Gary Ginsburg. Howard instead went on to go be a deputy mayor for Mike. Gary got this incredible job at Time Warner and couldn't really turn it down. But, Mike gave me a $400,000 bonus. It was $234,000 after taxes. It was the most money I ever had in my life by like tenfold, right? And I decided, you know what? I kind of want to try to be an entrepreneur. So I started a company, but what I knew was just being another political consultant in and of itself wouldn't really be that successful. And I figured, okay, there's two things that I'm sort of good at and might have that's a little unique. I like really running campaigns, not just doing the lobbying or the PR or the polling, but really the strategy and then all of the nuts and bolts and the execution. And simply because I've had this weird itinerant career, I've done politics in Illinois and in Washington and New York. And when I was at Lehman, I spent 2 years running around the country to state capitals every day. So I kind of know the country. And instead of just doing this in one place, I can do it everywhere. So I started a campaign management business. And it was doing pretty well. We had, good clients like Walmart and Expedia and Taubman. But then I think where we're leading to is sort of how this pivoted into tech. And in 2011, I'm sitting in a Walmart meeting, and a friend of mine named Kevin Sheeky, who's another Bloomberg guy, called me and said, hey, there's this guy with a small transportation startup. He's having some regulatory problems. Would you mind talking to him? Later that day, I become Uber's first advisor, and then I get really lucky because Travis calls me back and says, hey, listen, I can't afford your fee. Would you take equity? And thank God I said yes. So that was during the Series A. Earned it, spent the better part of the next 5 years just beating the living shit out of the taxi industry all over the U.S. to make ride sharing a possibility. You mentioned Travis's law in your introduction. Yeah, it's kind of what Travis and I came up with, which is taxi has a lot of money to give campaign donations, a lot of money to hire lobbyists. We're at the time this very small startup. How do we fight back? Use the people, right? So once we got into a market, kind of get into the market without permission, hold off the regulators for as long as we can, build up market share as quickly as we can, not so much to just be able to then topple over the incumbent, but to be able to turn those people into our political advocates. And then when the regulators came to shut us down, we could turn it on and say to all of our customers, if you like this thing called Uber, we need your help because we're not going to survive otherwise. Please, tweet here, email here. And it worked. I mean, millions and millions of people who probably never vote in elections politically over the years have advocated for Uber simply because they wanted the right to be able to have ride sharing.
I want to get into Uber in much more detail in a second, but I want to start a little bit on your journey through Tusk Strategies with something you did that was very much in the public interest, but backed by billionaires that are no stranger to the New York Stock Exchange. People like Paul Tudor Jones, Steve Druckenmiller, Ken Langone.
Yeah.
They came to you, Bradley, with a problem or an opportunity, as you saw it, the idea that charter schools had not made much inroads in Albany and the state of New York.
Yeah, so all three of those guys are really wonderful backers of education reform and charter schools and have really put their money where their mouth is over the years and built a bunch of schools. But the challenge is there was a cap on the number of charter schools because the teachers' unions have so much power. In Albany, they're very threatened by charter schools because the teachers aren't unionized, and they typically outperform regular schools where the teachers are unionized. So we were up against the cap, and as a result, the sector couldn't grow. And you had all these kids all over the city whose parents wanted to send them to charters because it was a better alternative, and they couldn't simply because the law in Albany didn't allow for it. So Mike made an effort to change the law, and it just went really badly. Teachers' union just stepped all over it. And then all of a sudden, I sit down with these three guys, and Joel Klein and Kevin Sheekey, and they say, hey, can you try to figure out how to overturn the cap? And at first, I didn't think it was necessarily possible to beat the teachers union in Albany, but we got really lucky. At the time, I don't know if you remember, there was something called Race to the Top, which was an Obama program, basically using federal money to incentivize states to do education reform by kind of making it a competition. And you can take the same program, when you turn to a competition, all of a sudden people are willing to do things they would otherwise never do. And New York was eligible to win $700 million. And when we did the polling, I just asked this question, like, how would you feel if New York turned its nose up at $700 million, right? Just kind of as a throwaway question. And it was like 92% were like, really upset about it. It's like, oh my God, this is an opening here. So the whole campaign wasn't about the merits of charter schools. The whole campaign was about
don't let Albany blow $700 million.
We can't win the money without increasing the charter school cap. And Albany is corrupt, and Albany keeps raising your taxes. And you can't let them do this. And it worked. We won. We beat the teachers union, and ultimately landed 125,000 more charter school seats and $2 billion a year more in funding for charter schools.
And it seems like you really learned some important lessons about with this, your nascent little company, the billionaires coming with a problem. They're funding you adequately to use the weapons and tools that you've learned how to deploy in previous campaigns, and you're knowing how to hit entrenched interests where it hurts most.
Yeah.
So in the intro, we referenced this complex relationship between Uber and New York City. I want to listen to a Wall Street Journal video that was published in July 2015.
Uber to de Blasio. Take a hike. In an effort to lobby against a Bill de Blasio administration proposal to cap the number of Uber cars on the road in New York City for 1 year, Uber has added a new feature to its app. It's called de Blasio. And when selected, the normally bustling map of Ubers driving around the city goes blank, and users are encouraged to sign a petition against the proposed cap.
Pretty smart.
Yeah, so first of all, it was a woman named Caitlin Dukash who worked in the Uber office. She was pretty junior, but man, what a great idea. And it really encapsulated all these things that we were doing, which was the whole campaign that we ran. Keep in mind, there's a saying, you can't fight City Hall, right? That exists for a reason. In the New York City Council, a close vote is 49-2, right? If you somehow got 5 no votes, it's like almost a revolution. And de Blasio proposes this cap on Uber's growth. I'm sitting in Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, actually how the book opens, and Travis says, you got to beat this thing. And I'm thinking, like, this is not feasible at all. And I just said, all right, well, 2 questions. How much money can I spend? Is there anything I can't do? And Travis, being Travis, said, do whatever you need to do. And I'm sitting on the flight home, and it kind of hits me all of a sudden. Everything de Blasio does is constructed as de Blasio, champion of inequality, champion of the poor, champion of the left, against big, bad, evil corporation. That's how every narrative is for every fight he has. And my question to myself was, what if he came at him from the left and you were the liberal in the campaign and you were accusing him of being racist and accusing him of being anti-immigrant and all of that and try to flip the narrative? And it worked. And it worked really for 2 reasons. One, I like to think we ran a good campaign. But 2, more importantly, the facts were on our side. The taxi industry has this incredibly horrible legacy and reputation for racism, where taxi drivers, and if you ask any African-American or Latino person in New York, they'll tell you this happened to them. They raise their hand to get a taxi, and taxi's free, the light's on, but they go right by them. And they don't want to pick them up because of the color of their skin. And so it had been happening for decades, and it was so institutionalized that there was so much anger. So for the same reason that I think we were able to build up a pretty diverse customer base in the first place for Uber and for ride sharing, we were able to sort of harness all of that anger and unleash it. And de Blasio just had no idea what hit him. And all of these council members who, they win their council primaries with like 9,000 votes, 12,000 votes, are getting 26,000 emails from people who didn't even know they existed, but who live in their district before that. And we overwhelmed them. And then in the span of a month, we picked up enough council members that finally they just dropped the bill entirely and we won.
And the book ends on that. The book includes all those victorious moments. Last month, though, the city council capped the number of Uber and Lyft drivers allowed on the road. Has de Blasio won the war, or just is this most recent battle?
No, maybe. So I stopped working with Uber when Travis stopped being CEO. And Dara came in, and I will say, because I hold a decent amount of equity in Uber, he's done a lot of really good things. He settled the Waymo lawsuit, which was great. He settled the dispute with the city of London. He did a deal with Grab. So he did a bunch of things that I think were probably necessary for the company. But the mandate he came in under, and his personality is, make everyone love you. Don't fight with anyone. Don't argue with anyone. Don't be Travis, right? Now, Uber never would have gotten off the ground if not for Travis's personality, because we were literally breaking a cartel in taxi, and that doesn't happen by making everyone love you. But 8 years and $76 billion, whatever it was in valuation later, the board wants something different. The problem with all of it is you can do that. Everyone can love you, and you can settle a bunch of long festering problems. That probably gets us to the right path on an IPO, and obviously something a lot of people in this podcast will be focused on in the next 12 months or so. But you can't do that and simultaneously be good at winning a bare-knuckle political fight. And Taxi and de Blasio saw that, and they realized that Uber's nature had changed because Dara was just a very different kind of CEO than Travis. And they pounced, and Uber did not have the wherewithal to fight back appropriately this time, and they lost. The biggest concern for me is not just that caps in New York ultimately will lead to longer wait times and higher prices and everything else, but there's no reason this won't happen all over the world. I mean, taxi is effectively the same kind of industry in every single city across the world. And when they saw that it failed in New York in 2015, people left us alone everywhere because they saw how badly we humiliated de Blasio. Now they see it win. I fear that Uber is going to face these same fights everywhere and won't be able to fight them effectively.
This tension between preserving your brand or getting in the gutter and having a bare-knuckle fight is another conversation you had with Elon Musk in the state of Connecticut and other states where they wanted to get around the challenge of selling directly to consumers rather than working through a network of dealers, which is basically the same as the taxi commissions around the world. These local interests, the type of people who are filmed gauzily in series like Friday Night Lights when the owner of the Buddy who owns the car dealership is the greatest philanthropist in town. You told Elon that you need to fight this, but at the time he was saying, no, the brand's more important.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because Elon's substance on this issue was 1,000% right, which is there was a time in society when having a car dealer made sense because the cars had to go from the factory to a dealer to the consumer. Today we have this little thing called the internet, which really makes a car dealership unnecessary. So all it does is impose significantly higher costs on everyone else. So Elon wanted to sell directly to consumer, and he was on the merits completely right. But car dealers are really popular. They're really entrenched in the community. They sponsor the Little League team and the 4th of July parade and all that stuff. And for us to win, we couldn't just say, oh, this is better for consumers. We had to say, this owner of this Kia dealership gave a check to this politician for this much money on this date, and in return got him to bottle up this bill. Hard stuff that's not unusual in politics, but we would have had to have gone really hard around pay-to-play and corruption and employed a lot of tactics that were, reporters will criticize because they're seen as sort of either dirty politics or just rough politics. Just like when I knocked Wiener out of the mayor's race, I was criticized for using, rough politics. And Elon's team and Elon, I guess, just felt like the risk to the reputation was greater than the benefit of being able to sell directly to consumers. And so they chose not to do that stuff and didn't pass the bills they needed to in Texas and Connecticut and Michigan and Indiana and a few other states. And it hurt their business model to a certain extent. But it's funny because the point I made in the book now has almost been a little bit obviated by what's happened since the book published, which the point of the book was to say, you can win a lot of tough political fights, but they come with consequences. They have financial costs, they have reputational costs, and you just have to weigh the cost and decide, is this worth it to me or not? Elon made the decision in his case, and that I was involved in, that it wasn't worth it to him. He has since caused so much reputational damage to himself anyway that whatever would have come out of our thing would have been like a fly speck, so it wouldn't have mattered. But I thought he made the wrong decision, but he kind of thought about it in the right way.
On a totally different level for people like both Travis and Elon, and comparing it to the intransigence of a Chuck Schumer not wanting to take good advice from a person who can sort of see things from a disconnected level from the politician or the leader, and even people like Mike Bloomberg, who are very set in their ways. The journeys that both Travis and Elon have had outside of the operational aspect of managing their business or fighting the local fights that they had, it's also a tragic story in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, in a weird way, and this is a conversation I've certainly had with Travis a lot in the last year or so, which is it takes a very certain kind of person to take this sort of outlandish idea and turn it into a business and then beat an entrenched interest in industry and really have it succeed. There are very few people who can do that. They're really unique. The challenge is not, by definition, everyone is good at certain things and not as good at others. And both of those guys are probably a little less well-equipped to run high-functioning bureaucracies than they were to take this radical idea and push it all the way through. So launching electric cars, sending rockets to Mars, like, that kind of stuff that Elon does makes total sense. The day-to-day operations of production of the Model 3, there are probably better people than him to do that. Travis, in some ways, same thing. Really amazing at coming up with this idea and making it happen. When they became a $70-ish billion company, it became a giant bureaucracy, and he's a really smart guy, but that definitely took advantage of his strengths a lot less.
So the lessons that you've learned along the way, forming Tusk Strategies, your success with Uber to create a replicable model that you summarized nicely with so many of these infographics that are throughout the Fixer. I want to go through some of the successes and hear what the problem was and how your solution worked. Let's go back a few years. Every sports fan in America was being bombarded with commercials from FanDuel and DraftKings, and then this happened.
This morning, in the multi-billion-dollar and regulated world of fantasy sports, we're hearing about allegations of insider trading, suggesting employees were placing bets using information not available to the public. The New York Times reports that an employee at DraftKings last week admitted to inadvertently releasing data before the start of the third week of the NFL games. And the worker won $350,000 at a rival site, FanDuel, that same week.
So regulators began to come down on the companies, and you saw this as an opportunity to pick up the phone. Last year, Daily Fantasy attracted $3.2 billion in entrance fees. How did you do it?
Yeah, so I had been introduced to FanDuel just coincidentally about a month earlier. KKR is one of FanDuel's biggest investors. Jen Hanley, who runs comms at Tusk Ventures, had run comms at KKR before that. And so they said to her, why don't you guys talk to these guys, because at some point they may need to know you. And I had a nice conversation with them. I happen to have a lot of experience in kind of the politics of gaming, so I knew a little more than they expected. But that was it. And then all of a sudden, the Time story hits. Ethan Haskell is accused of insider trading. Turns out, by the way, he didn't actually do it, but no one ever remembers that part of it. And Christian Janeski, who was FanDuel's and still is general counsel and a really smart guy, I sent him an email. I said, look, if I were you, I'm sure you're doing these things. I would do these 5 things. And I listed out just quickly kind of the overall strategy for how I would go about it. And the reply was, when can you start? And we started that night and have been working with FanDuel and investing in FanDuel ever since. And the big opportunity now is sports betting licenses are now going to be available in lots of different states. The U.S. Supreme Court created a ruling last May that overturned what's called PASPA, which is a federal prohibition on it. So it's going to be a crazy battle royale in every single state for who gets those licenses, which for me, there's nothing more fun than that. So yeah, and then within that, what's interesting is there's the rise of esports, which I think will then piggyback on the rise of sports betting, and we're incubating a really great company called Game Profit that's a gaming platform for esports. So yeah, it's a really fun industry, so I'm glad I sent that email.
A not really fun industry is property and casualty insurance.
Better than you think, actually.
I know. I was in it. I was at the Hartford and Willis for many years, and the only people who advertised more that season than FanDuel and DraftKings are Geico and State Farm and Allstate.
Yeah.
And here comes into the fray Lemonade. Tell me about Lemonade.
Yeah, so Lemonade's a really great company. Still, I think one of the best companies in our portfolio. When I keep saying that, there's 2 parts to our business. There's a part where we work with startups, usually in return for equity, solving the political problems we're discussing. And then we also raise the fund. We have investment rights in each company we work with, and we deploy capital on the ones that we really like. And Lemonade's certainly one of those. And Lemonade, imagine if you could sell insurance, but you didn't need brokers, agents, offices, Super Bowl ads, and you had good technologists. You could build a much better product and offer it a lot less expensively, and that's exactly what Lemonade does. They're a Tel Aviv-based company. A guy named Daniel Schreiber is the CEO, a brilliant guy, and came up with a model and said, we're going to sell people basic renter's insurance for significantly less money than they're paying right now. They can do the whole thing online. It'll take less than 5 minutes. We use social behavioral science to decide who to take as customers, so therefore we don't have to ever investigate fraud on the back end. So if you have a claim, they just pay it, right? There's no whole process they put you through. And it's a fun, pleasant experience. So, of course, the regulators didn't want it to happen, right? So you need to be licensed in each state individually to sell insurance, but New York was sort of the holy grail. And the State Department of Financial Services was really just slow walking in the whole thing. Maybe in part because they thought it wouldn't be good for the incumbent insurers, but I think also in part just because there are bureaucrats who just feel like the world should move at their pace when they say so, and that was the case here, and would have continued to be the case until Lemonade brought us in, and we changed the conversation by saying to Governor Cuomo, this is going to be a good story for you or a bad story for you, but it's not going to be no story. You can't just let some bureaucrat just screw around with Lemonade forever. So as we're negotiating, finally I call our lobbyist one night and I say, listen, you tell Cuomo this. Front page of tomorrow's journal is either new startup flees New York for London because of Cuomo's corruption and incompetence, or new startup launches low-cost insurance and creates jobs in New York. You decide which one. I'm cool either way. Just let me know. We got our license the next day. And then went around the country and subsequently got it in California, Texas, Florida, and so on.
We talked at the very beginning about this model of the platform connecting buyers and sellers and how it relates to our parent company, Intercontinental Exchange. A similar model in a very different space is Handy.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of time sort of asking friends, do you have a carpenter? Do you have an interior designer? Do you have people who can get things done for me and here's what I'll pay? But it's so analog, it's so word of mouth, it is not at all disrupted.
Right.
Handy had that option. It made it all the way into the tax bill in 2017, but then found its way out.
So Handy basically just said it's always hard to find a housekeeper, and you just have to rely on someone randomly who says, yeah, my person's okay. Handy's a platform. If you want to clean, you say so on the platform. You want someone to clean for you, you say so on the platform. You hire them, and they work. Oisin Hanrahan, who's the CEO and founder of Handy, had this brilliant and sort of obvious and yet now seems really counterintuitive idea, which was, even though they're independent contractors, let's give them benefits because, housekeepers have been kind of working in the gray economy since literally the beginning of time. We could actually allow them to still be independent contractors and have flexibility, but still get health care or pension or whatever else. And we wanted to be able to provide benefits to our workers. And we couldn't, you know why? Because the unions didn't want us to. Even though you would think if you're a union, the thing you would want more than anything else is for a poor housekeeper making, $15 an hour to get some health care or get some disability coverage. They didn't, because their fear was if someone had all the flexibility of being an independent contractor and could still get benefits, why would they bother to join the union? Why would they pay union dues? What would happen to the union's salaries? So as a result, they blocked us in a bunch of states. So we decided, okay, let's take this federally and try to change the U.S. tax code to make it clear that anyone in the sharing economy is an independent contractor, which would then give us the flexibility to go ahead and do this. We got really far into the bill. John Thune was our champion, and he was great about it. There's something called the Byrd Rule, which turns out it's about provisions being germane to other provisions in budget bills. And basically the Senate parliamentarian was still Harry Reid's person, even though McConnell had taken over, and basically said, okay, let me take 10 amendments I know the Democrats hate, and I'll claim they violate the Byrd Rule and knock them out. And ours ended up being one of them. So instead, we went out, we passed bills in 6 states last year. We're about to get 2 more done in the next couple of weeks, but not nearly as efficient as if we'd be able to do in Washington.
While Bradley Tusk has left the employment of politicians, he remains active in politics and the technology behind the future of advanced citizenship. After the break, we hear about his plan to make voting as easy as ordering an Uber. That's right after this.
Billions of dollars in funding have been cut from youth sports programs in recent years, leaving millions of students unable to play. Dick's Sporting Goods believes sports matter. Sports build character, increase confidence, and motivate kids to stay in school and aim for higher education. Since 2014, Dick's and the Dick's Foundation have committed $50 million through their Sports Matter initiative to combat the youth sports funding crisis. To date, they're humbled to have helped over 1 million youth athletes in need across all 50 states. Learn more about this crisis of youth sports at sportsmatter.org.
Welcome back to the Ice House. Our guest today is Bradley Tusk, founder and CEO of Tusk Holdings, and we've been talking about some of the stories and lessons from his new book, The Fixer: My Adventures Saving Startups from Death by Politics. In the book, Bradley, you mentioned that shortly after starting Tusk Strategies, you decided that your time working on political campaigns had run its course. What was the tipping point?
I think that I kind of realized that other than Mike Bloomberg, 99.9% of politicians that I worked with, even the good, honest, smart ones, just couldn't live without the validation of holding office. It is literally their oxygen. So to ask them to not have the title and the honorifics and the attention that comes with being a city council member, an assembly member, a U.S. senator, whatever it is like asking you or me to literally just stop breathing. They can't do it. And so as a result, all the decisions they make are completely correlated to how do I keep this job? And we live in a world where every district is gerrymandered so that basically the primary effectively is the general election, and turnout in primaries are incredibly low. So as a result, whether it's On the Republican side, where on guns, or on the Democratic side on teachers unions, when you have turnout of say 10 to 15% in a primary, a very, very small minority of people who are the most ideological and the most polarizing tend to control the agenda. So like, let's say that you're a Republican congressman from Florida. You probably know an assault weapon ban is not a bad idea. You probably don't want people toting around AK-47s around your district, but turnout in your primary is 12%. Half of that 12% are NRA members. You're not going to do anything to piss off 50% of the voters in your electorate. Now imagine that everyone could vote in their phones and turn out your primary is 60% instead of 12%. The NRA share goes from being half the electorate to about a tenth of the electorate. The politics flip completely. And because all you care about is keeping your job, you'll adapt to whatever, right? So if the mainstream view and that elects you is now, we want an assault weapon ban, you'll be for it. If the view of the people who actually vote in your primaries, we don't want one, you'll be against it. So most politicians, I learned, are just totally adaptable to whatever they need to do to stay in the job. And on one hand, that's a horrible trait that really screws up our democracy. On the other hand, it kind of makes them easy to figure out, right? Which is, if we change the inputs, we'll change the outputs. And so the combination of that and then all the work that we did, and we talked about here for Uber and FanDuel and Bird now, where we mobilize our customers, taught me that people will advocate politically if you make it convenient enough, even if they'll never go vote, in a system that was designed 250 years ago in an agrarian society. And adding that last piece in the blockchain means that we can vote on our phones more securely than we vote in elections today, and we can do it mobilely, which can really increase participation. So my foundation, Tusk Montgomery Philanthropies, which thanks to that decision to take equity in Uber, allowed me to have a family foundation. One of the two issues we work on is mobile voting, and we're running a program nationally to try to create this in elections. So the state of West Virginia was the first state to do it. They did it for deployed military because their argument is the people who are literally putting their lives on the line to protect our right to vote, their votes never count, right? They get mailed in a month after from Kandahar or whatever, and they just get thrown in the garbage. So Mac Warner, Secretary of State of West Virginia, really wanted to try to bring a better way of voting to deployed military, and was willing to give this a try. I funded the state's cost to administer the election, and in the primary, it was available for deployed military from 2 counties in West Virginia. We announced last week it'll now be available to members from 24 different counties. We're negotiating with other states right now, and hopefully we'll have a couple of jurisdictions for next year. And so, we're proving that technology can work. We're proving that people will take advantage of it. It's going to take a while because if you want to see bipartisanship, try to change the system and tell all the people who want power this way, say, we're going to make it easier for someone to come in and take you out. They're not going to like that. No union's going to like that. No hardcore trade group is going to like it. Lobbyists aren't going to like it. It's not good for anyone that currently has power. But eventually it'll happen because I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they can't conceive of a world where you couldn't do something that fundamental on your phone. And so I think in the time between now and when they're a voting age, I've got to create a situation where it is clearly seen as effective and safe, and therefore there's no reason not to do it. So we are kind of running all over the country, trying to make this thing happen. I'm spending a bunch of money, and so far so good.
If Mike Bloomberg wanted to become president in 2008 or 2012 or 2016, though, he doesn't have the app, and he's going to have to do it the hard way. And he passed on 08 and 12. He was still mayor, so that he could still run the most important city in the world and have his perch. But the actuarial clock is catching up with him. He's getting up in years. 2016 is his year if he's going to do it. I'd known some of the story from Howard. I'd known about pre-picking the cabinet and making some announcements. I didn't know about how Travis came into the story and how technology came into the story. You had it primed to go, and you pulled back at the last minute. Yeah.
I mean, so Mike had asked me to run the campaign if he did run for president, and so I decided I would do two things. One is I would take a leave from my company and do that if he did choose to run. But even in the 3 or 4 months leading up to his decision, I put together sort of the makings of the campaign, because the challenge of running as independent is there's no infrastructure for you to get on the ballot in all 50 states. Now, money can solve that problem, but it still takes money plus organization. And working backwards on the calendar, I said to Mike, I think it was like March 3rd or whatever it was that year, you have to decide by that day, because any day after that, I can't guarantee that I'll be able to pull off getting on the ballot in all 50 states. And so that was our deadline. But what I kind of realized was, if we ran a conventional campaign, we would have had a conventional outcome, which was defeat, right? No independent has ever won the presidency before. And the only way to do it was to try to do things really, really differently. And there were two big ideas that I was excited about. One you mentioned, which was pre-announcing the cabinet. So my thought was, Mike's greatest skill, and this was true when he was mayor also, is really picking talent and empowering them to do a good job and just getting the best people possible. And I thought, what if he spent most of the campaign just running around the country, getting America's best and brightest on board to be part of his cabinet? So, Bill Gates is Secretary of State, or Oprah Winfrey, Secretary of Commerce, or whatever it is. And every week, you make another announcement and roll someone out, and you get a lot of excitement around that. The press plays a guessing game. Some of those people actually be better retail campaigners than our guy was. So we take advantage of all of that. We don't need their money. And you can make the argument to the voters and say, listen, this is America's best and brightest. If you want them to come in for 4 years and 4 years only and try to fix our problems, vote for them. If you like the way things are, vote for the normal guys. I felt like that would have been a really effective argument. The other big thing was, if you're a Republican from a get out the vote standpoint, you have churches and evangelicals and that whole world. And if you're a Democrat, you have labor unions. As independent, you don't have either one.
How do you put together a field staff?
Right. So that was the problem that was really vexing me. And then it kind of hit me that what I had been spending all of my time doing up until that moment was exactly the answer. So flew out to San Francisco, went over to Uber, sat down with Travis, and I said, I want to pay to send every American to the polls on election day if you put a Bloomberg button on the app. And he's, look.
80 million rides?
Yeah, I was just budgeting. I figured we'd spend at least $400 million on it. And it's fine. Mike's worth $52 billion, so there was no real amount of money I could have spent that would have been material to him. And Travis, of course, being a tech guy, loves Mike because Mike's a godfather of tech. Bloomberg LP is a tech company. And so once we kind of confirmed that there was no legal reason you couldn't do it, he was in. And then I started seeing other people in the Valley who had control over home sharing or delivery or all these different things where we could utilize the sharing economy to become our field campaign, to become our get out the vote campaign.
You know how to put up a house sign, you're on handy.
There you go. Or you're an Airbnb host, we send you a sign, right? You're a DoorDash delivery person, you can have some campaign lit while you're handing out, the smoothies. So that was the idea, is how do we co-opt the sharing economy to becoming our field operation? And people were willing to do it because they were really excited about the idea of Mike Bloomberg being president. Obviously, Mike chose not to run, and therefore we couldn't do either of those things. But I still think they're both really good ideas.
His math was that if he ran, the odds of Trump winning went up.
Yeah, so, look, Mike's a math genius, so far be it from me to dispute him on that. But we knew we couldn't win 270 electoral college votes as an independent. There was no shot of that. So what we thought we could do was win 4 or 5 states, pick up somewhere between 75 and 100 electoral college votes, which would ensure that no one got to 270. Then, as people who have watched House of Cards or Veep know, it goes to the House. And you have to win 26 out of 50 states, and each state, as a delegation, gets 1 vote. And at the time, it was 33 Republicans, 17 Democrats. So my thought was Hillary would be dead in the water because none of the Republicans would consider voting for her. So we'd pick up all 17 Democratic states because she'd have to support us effectively, which meant we needed 9 out of the remaining 33 Republican states to get to 26. And there were, I'm not going to name them, but there were prominent House Republicans calling us and saying, I think you can pull this off. I'll whip this for you. And we could have run campaigns, targeted every single member, and we obviously had a lot of money to use to try to influence things, to pick up those 9 states. And the whole decision whether or not to run was, is that a feasible strategy? And Mike said to me the day before he announced he wasn't running, well, what if we only get 8 states? And I said, well, then Trump wins. And he said, what if we don't run at all? Well, Hillary wins, right? Not that, Mike wasn't like the most rabid Hillary Clinton supporter, but I think a lot of people, he could live with it and really didn't want to see Trump elected. And so he said, I can't run if it's more likely that I'm going to elect Trump than not. And so, I think for the right reason he didn't run, but in retrospect, he might have been the only thing standing in the way.
So those of us who are keeping track, there was this article, I was weird where it came from, Bradley, the Times of London, Bloomberg looking at a 2020 campaign. This has been picked up everywhere.
Yep.
It hasn't been strongly batted down by the Bloomberg camp at all. And the thrust of the story is running as a Democrat. Do the rudiments of the campaign hold to what you were thinking in 2016?
Not.
Is this a real story?
Not as a Democrat. So interestingly, my luck would be this story pops and my book comes out a few days later. And so I'm, all over the media promoting my book, and every single host says, so is Bloomberg running or not? And I'm sitting there trying to deal with the question. So here's where I think we are. What Mike said, and Mike's not always the most calculated public speaker, was if I were to run, it'd be as a Democrat, because in this climate, people are so polarized and they're so partisan. Look, if Kavanaugh does get confirmed, I think it's only going to be that much more so, and I guess we'll find out in a couple of days, that it just, the path that existed in 2016 for independent just probably isn't there in 2020. So if you were to run, you'd run as a Democrat. Now, whether Mike would want to run as a Democrat, could win, I don't know. I firmly believe he'd be the best person to be president, but the job of winning office and the job of holding office are sometimes 2 different jobs. So we'll have to see. I mean, certainly no one thought that Trump was going to win in 16, so all the pundits would tell you they know what's going to happen are basically lying. I could paint a scenario where Mike gets to the primary and wins, and I could paint a scenario where he doesn't catch on at all. And so, he's just going to have to decide eventually, do I want to be president badly enough that I will run with, long odds? And by the way, every single candidate has long odds, right? And the ones who don't are like Hillary Clinton, who lost. And if you want it badly enough, you have to be willing to do that. And so Mike will have to make that decision in the next sort of 12 months or so. And if he does, then we'll go do it.
I said in my book, as Secretary Clinton was on her book tour after her time as Secretary of State, that she'd earned so much credibility in her time in public office. Her popularity coming out of the State Department was very high. You could, at her age, you could be a kingmaker or a queenmaker up in Chappaqua. You can continue to have a great life, making your speaking fees, being a grandmother. Who needs the bother? And if you're Mike Bloomberg at 74 or 75, who needs the bother? Can he instead get his emotion and money and passion behind someone of a different generation and put the whole Bloomberg all-star team towards someone who thinks and acts in a Bloomberg-like way and not be the person who's the lightning rod?
He could, right? And look, he
spent a huge amount of money on this cycle.
Up to $100 million for the midterms. But even more so than that, just to reinforce your point, Mike pays for staff in mayor's offices, not just around the U.S., but all over the world, to take the ideas that he's interested in, like innovation, and try to move them forward. So the idea of him kind of having proteges and grooming people to think like he thinks and govern like he governs is very real because it's already happening. And this is someone who, between his work in climate change, education reform, guns, immigration, public health, has huge influence over public policy, not just in the U.S., but all over the globe. And so there's a lot of ways that he can impact society. Whether or not he's president, I still do believe that if you're saying who's the single most capable person to sit in that chair in the Oval Office, it's Mike Bloomberg. I worked for him at City Hall. I worked for him as campaign manager. I know the man really well. And it's just he's the most impressive person I've ever worked with. But I think he can have a huge impact on the election one way or another.
Big character in your book, as we wrap up, is the current mayor, Bill de Blasio. He's on his second term as mayor of New York. I don't know if he'll run for a third term, but he certainly wants to maybe take on the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, perhaps in a national bid. And yet here's the city that you and I are sitting in. We're sitting in the library of the New York Stock Exchange, a 225-year-old institution. The love and care and passion for this city that over 3 terms Mike Bloomberg had seems to be devoid in the current administration. Does someone like Bradley Tusk say, let me use the tools that we've figured out, I'll take over the city? Or how can we get this city back to the type of leadership that it had under 3 terms under Bloomberg?
Yeah, so I'm not a politician, so I'm definitely not the solution here. But I think there's a few answers. One is, I think the stuff we're doing in mobile voting is really important. I'll just do a little bit of math for you. We have 8.6 million residents in this city. De Blasio won the 2013 mayoral primary with 282,000 votes, so about 4% of the population. He then won the 2017 primary with 320,000 votes. So basically, 95% of the city didn't participate in his election one way or another. And de Blasio's not stupid. He governed for that 4 or 5% to the exclusion of everybody else. So the first thing is you've just got to have a lot more turnout, ideally through your phone, through mobile voting. But even if there's more people going to the polling place, in order to get a better mayor, one of the reasons that Mike won is because people were so scared after 9/11 that they did turn out. And without that increased turnout, we wouldn't have won. We would have lost by a lot. So that's number one. Number two, one of the benefits of Mike, and I'll give Rudy some credit also for before that, is they put a lot of good systems and processes and people in place for governance, and not just sort of the big stuff at City Hall, but all the Department of Buildings, the Sanitation Department, Parks Department, just good people all throughout who are talented and apolitical. And they're able to institutionalize it in a way that made it more functional and effective. So at least for the first term of de Blasio after Mike, that hangover still was there where the city could still run pretty well. I'm admittedly biased. I don't like de Blasio, but it does feel to me like the seams are coming off a little bit, right? The city feels dirtier. The homeless population is a lot worse. Crime stats are going up. The MTA is a disaster. NYCHA is a disaster. And so, the other thing is, if the city gets bad enough, people start to open their eyes and notice when they think everything's fine, they don't show up at all. And if de Blasio wins, whatever. But when they realize that, New York City is not inherently safe. New York City is not inherently well run. It's as safe and well run as the people who are actually in charge, right? And we've had good mayors that have run the city really well. We've had bad mayors that have run the city really poorly. And so eventually, if we don't get someone in City Hall who's a lot more competent, a lot more honest, a lot harder working, we're going to fall apart as a city.
Bradley Tusk, CEO of Tusk Strategies, a huge resume and journey in politics, now helping technology companies. His new book is The Fixer, My Adventures Saving Startups from Death by Politics. Bradley, thanks for joining us in the Ice House.
Thanks for having me on. That was really fun.
That's our conversation for this week. Our guest was Bradley Tusk, founder and CEO of Tusk Holdings, and author of The Fixer, My Adventures Saving Startups from Death by Politics. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. And if you've got a comment or a question you'd like one of our experts to tackle on a future show, email us at icehouse@theice.com or tweet at us at NYSE. Our show is produced by Pete Ash and Ian Wolfe, with production assistance from Ken Abel and Stephen Portner. I'm Josh King, signing off from the Library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of this information, and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security or recommendation of any security or trading practice.